In this video, I'm going to take a look at the Meyer Optic Görlitz Domiron 50 f2. It's an exact amount lens and was made in East Germany for only a relatively short time in the early 1960s. Today, the Domiron can sell for as much as $600 or more online. That's a lot of money for a slow, old, fast 50 with an unfashionable exact amount. But of course, it's not any old lens. It's a lens that has a cult status. It's seen as one of the most unique old fast 50s ever made. A lens that has been described as bokeh royalty, one of the special ones. You could argue that the price of the lens is justified, given its reputation rarity. But curiously, this lens isn't always that hard to find. If you look online, there's often a good supply of these lenses for sale, unlike some other rare lenses, and the price is all over the place. If you are being a little cynical, you might wonder why owners want to sell their lenses. Are they not as impressed as they hoped? Perhaps they don't think it's worth the money they can sell it for. So how good is this lens? And why is it so fascinating to aficionados of vintage lenses? Why does its market price vary so much? And is it really bokeh royalty? These are the questions I'll be attempting to answer in the video. I'll show you the lens I bought. It was cheaper than most, for reasons I'll explain, and I'll demonstrate how it performs wide open and stop down. I'll then discuss how the Domiron compares with some of its contemporaries, and return to the question of bokeh royalty. The more I've learnt about the lens, and the more I've used it, the more intriguing it's become, and as a result the video is longer than I originally intended, but I hope you find it's worth the time. And if you'd like to go to specific parts of the video, I've included time links in the description below. The first thing to notice about the lens is how big it is. Here's the earlier M42 Meyer Optic Primatar 50 f2.8, and in comparison, the Domiron is relatively huge. I do like the chrome and zebra styling of these lenses, very retro cool, although a smaller number of copies were made in all black. The lens is large for early 1960s 50s. The only other fast 50 I own that has a similar size to the Domiron is the RE Auto Topcore 58 f1.4 from 1963, but the topcore is faster and has a longer focal distance. However, with the Domiron, looks can be deceiving because the glass elements are set back into the body, with nothing like the expanse of glass that the topcore has at the front. The next thing to notice about the lens is this lever sticking out of the side. It was designed for Exacta cameras, and the lever acts as both a stop-down lever and the way to fire the shutter button located on the camera under the lever. It's a little less sturdier design than some other lens designs for Exacta cameras, such as this pan color, but it does the job. The lens actually has two different stop-down mechanisms. The lever, which you move to stop the lens down to your chosen f-stop once you focus the lens wide open, and then a separate open-shut aperture mechanism on the front of the lens barrel. Stop-down mechanisms are very useful because it means you can focus on your subject wide open with the brighter view, and then easily stop down to take the shot. I really like the design of this set of dual controls. It's amongst the best I've tried, so simple and useful. Meyer's much cheaper successor to the Domiron, the Oriston 50 f1.8, has an infuriatingly awkward, small, and badly positioned stop-down button here, too close to the camera body to find easily. The dual design of the Domiron is much better. Inside, the lens has 6 elements in 4 groups, a pretty standard double Gauss configuration, but it's actually made with a technically very interesting and unique design. According to reports online, the Domiron is the first standard lens to have floating elements, a very unusual design for the time. In fact, only a few very special mass-market lenses use floating elements in the 1960s and 70s. One of the advantages of floating elements is that lenses can focus closer up to their subjects, and the Domiron's closest focusing distance is 0.34 meters, closer than nearly all other 50s of the time, and as well as producing nice close-up shots, it's a feature that helps the lens produce even smoother bokeh. However, not everyone agrees that the lens does in fact have floating elements. They say this type of arrangement was only introduced years later. So I open up the lens to take a look. It's not a difficult operation. You need to unscrew this tiny screw at the front, and then unscrew the front part of the lens. I'm not at all an expert in what floating elements look like, but it basically means that one or more elements move independently from the other elements. Clearly, it doesn't mean an element is literally floating in air or something like that. As you can hopefully tell, if I rotate the focus ring, the elements inside the lens at the front don't move when you change the focus. On the other hand, the elements at the rear do move up and down as you change the focus. This confirms to me that the lens does have floating elements, and the lens is indeed a real pioneer for its time. Now, I need to talk about the condition of my copy of the lens. As I've already mentioned, my copy was quite a bit cheaper than others online, and that's because the lens has a patch of something nasty on the center of one of the inside elements. You can see it here. And here's a close-up of, let's call it a splodge. The seller was very open and honest about its existence. The splodge isn't as solid as it appears from this photo. From another angle, you can see it's made up of small, transparent blobs. If you look at other Domirons for sale online, you'll see that some of them have exactly the same type and shape of internal splodge, and some of these lenses are sold at a significant discount to others, hence the price variations. Before buying the lens, I thought the splodge must be a patch of fungus, but noted that the seller of another Domiron described it as a glue stain. And now I've inspected my lens. The composition of the splodge does seem to be much more glue-like than fungus. Anyway, I decided to take the risk, buy the lens, and see if I could open it up to clean the glass. As we've seen, I've been able to open the lens, but I haven't yet been able to get into the sealed middle unit to access those elements. So I decided to leave the unit as is, kill any live organic growth on the elements by leaving them in the sun for a day, just in cases, as the saying goes. Nothing happened after this sunbath. The splodge was still there. It hadn't gone brown, for example, like fungus might do, but at least, if there is any organic growth, it shouldn't grow anymore. The main effect of the splodge is clearly apparent, whether there are bright out-of-focus highlights, in the bubbles wide open, or hexagons stopped down. It's irritating, and you'll see more examples coming up. The effects are relatively easy to clean out in post-processing for photos, but more difficult for videos. And I'm not even sure that if I can get access to the splodge, whether it'll clean off. If anyone knows, please let me know. The other concern is whether the splodge has a strong impact on center sharpness. It must have some effect, but I've been happy with how sharp this lens is wide open and stop down, as we'll see in a moment. And now onto the lens's performance, and I'll start my review wide open at f2. My very first gut reaction when using the lens wide open for the first time, looking through the viewfinder at a bokeh-rich environment, is that the lens's rendering is very beautiful and painterly, with excellent subject isolation. It certainly didn't disappoint, even with my already sky-high expectations for the lens. These are two of the very first photos I took with the lens, just after I'd opened the box. They're snapped at the lens's minimum focus distance. Not many old standard fast 50s can focus this close, and I hope you can understand why I was so instantly impressed by that close focus and the rendering. And here's a small collection of some of my favorite wide-open shots from the lens, with smooth or busy backgrounds. The Domiron certainly produces a distinctive look to out-of-focus blur, especially when there's a lot going on in the scene, the way different areas are rendered, and the character of the out-of-focus highlights and bubbles. I'll take a closer look at those bubbles in more detail in a moment. The lens is acceptably sharp wide open and close up. I'd call it vintage sharp. These images haven't been sharpened in post-processing. One interesting thing about this lens is that at first glance, the images can look quite soft across the frame, but when you zoom in, the details in the in-focus areas are there. It's just that the overall effect is quite soft, if you get what I mean. In bright light situations, the lens can produce an obvious glow around in-focus areas that can distract from razor sharpness, but then so do many other fast 50s, and it's not nearly as pronounced as some other old lenses. I've hardly seen any purple or green fringing with bright backlighting, and that's an impressive result, better than some top-of-the-range modern lenses wide open. The lens will produce dramatic coma in very bright reflected areas. This crop of a wider image has the most dramatic effects I've seen from the lens. One particularly impressive feature of the lens is how good the transitions are from in to out of focus areas. It got me thinking about whether there are any other old fast 50s that are better in the way transitions are subtly rendered, and I don't think there are. Even when the backgrounds are quite busy, and the bokeh is inevitably busy too, the lens renders the transitions and blur in a lovely way. Wide open, with the right scene and light, the Domiron is fabulously good at producing bubbles. It's one of the most prolific bubble makers I've used, helped, of course, by its short minimum focus distance, if you're into big bubbles. Looking at the bubbles produced by a lens is one of the best ways of distinguishing between different lenses wide open, even between mere optic Görlitz lenses. For example, here are the clearly defined classic soap bubbles from the Trio Plan's triplet design. The Domiron renders out-of-focus points of light in a very different way, as these crops demonstrate very clearly. Typically, for many fast 50s, the bubbles distort into symmetrical ovals as you move away from the center of the frame. The Domiron's bubbles, on the other hand, are very different, because they don't distort like this. They are much more flattened on the outside. The shapes of the bubbles remind me of the Auto Takuma 35 f2.3's rendering, a lens that I know has a lot of fans for its distinctive bokeh. The Domiron's results can give a slight appearance of a swirl, and the shapes visually help to draw your attention towards the in-focus parts of an image, like the bubbles are pointing towards those in-focus parts. It's quite a subtle effect, but it can be very powerful too, as it helps to give images more of a 3D pop in the right compositions. And this in turn makes the Domiron a very creative lens for taking head and shoulders portraits, such as these ones. The background effects can become rather wild in certain scenes, so it helps to stop the lens down a little for some compositions. Another characteristic that the lens shares with the Auto Takuma 35 f2.3 involves flares. Both lenses produce what could be described as a waterfall of light flares wide open in the right conditions. It can be rather beautiful. The lens can lack contrast wide open, especially with bright side light creating flares, so the images may need some boosting in post-processing, but that's not much of a problem. Turning to how the lens performs stop-down, and this has been a surprise, to me at least. My copy of the lens is excellent stop-down, excellent, that is, for a 62-year-old lens. Closer up, when you stop down a little, you can see how well the lens sharpens up, perfectly good for pixel peeping. Indoors, the lens produces good, sharp images stop-down, for example under kitchen lights. If you have out-of-focus highlights, the blades do start to show pretty quickly as you stop down, as you can see with these series of images. Going back to the first click down, the highlights have rather strange shapes, at least on my copy. You'd expect to see a more clinical hexagon shape, but these highlights are clearly distorted on one side in an unusual way, something to do with the alignment of the blades. Stop down a little more, and the hexagons have straighter edges. These hexagons may not be to everyone's taste, but they certainly give you a distinctive retro look, compared to the efforts produced by lenses with many more blades, or the modern fashion for rounded blades. At longer distances, I found the lens is a very good walk-around lens, lots of macro details, and good contrasts and colours. The colours in particular respond very well to post-processing and can be quite vibrant if you want. Indeed, the more I've used the lens, the more impressed I've been with the results, especially on bright sunny days. The colours do have a lovely zing to them. One final and important observation about colours, that is applicable to some other old fast 50s as well, is that straight out of camera you can see marked differences between colour rendering wide open and colour rendering stop down, with wide open images having more of a vintage style tint. This tint is not too dissimilar to the kind of golden tint you see from the radioactive Pancolor 50f1.8. Indeed, in some photos I've taken, it's more pronounced than the Pancolors, and I rather like it. It gives a nice warm coloration, and you can always reprocess the colors if you want. Interestingly, my Geiger-Müller counter has picked up some radioactivity from the lens, but the readings are not nearly as strong as the pan color. Really, they hardly register at all, and the glass itself looks clear, but the radioactive traces are there. Stop down, the Domiron's colors are much more accurate and vivacious than the pan color. There's a tremendous difference in color rendering straight out of camera. These comparisons only serve to confirm how good the Domiron's colors are stop down, and why I probably need to untint my pan color. The images the lens produces are also excellent for black and white conversions. The results can be quite striking and dynamic. In terms of flares, stop right down. If you point the lens straight at a bright light, it not only flares, but it can also create effects from reflecting off the aperture blades. I actually prefer the flares the Domiron produces wide open to stop down. I think they're more interesting. Sunbursts are a bit hit and miss. These ones are good, but they're not always so clearly defined. Now it's high time to return to the question I asked at the start of the video. Is the Domiron the best bokeh lens ever made? Or at least, is it the best of breed amongst vintage fast 50s? I personally struggle with best this and greatest that, and in today's online social media world, these awards are thrown about cheaply, often as clickbait. Talking about the best bokeh lens is even more contentious, because rating the quality of bokeh is a notoriously subjective task. Some people like ultra-smooth bokeh, others like a busier, more distinctive look. Some people like bokeh bubbles to be quite discreet, others prefer clearly defined lines around the bubbles. Some people like swirly bokeh, while others don't, and so on and so forth. So where does the Domiron fit in all this? I'll give you my opinion at the end of the video. But before that, to support the discussion, I thought it'd be interesting to compare the Domiron's performance against another Mare Optic Görlitz lens, to see if it's even the best of breed in its own family. The Domiron is one of several fast 50s made by Mare Optic Görlitz up to the mid-1960s, when the brand was taken over by Pentagon. The lenses have a range of different optical designs, including the famous Trioplan 50mm and the Primoplan 58mm, made in various versions up to the 1950s, as well as the cheap Domiplan triplet lens and the popular double Gauss-derived Oriston. The Trioplan and Primoplan have some big fans of their bokeh, the Trioplan for those famous triplet soap bubbles, while the Primoplan, with its unusual Erno-style design, produces its own distinctive style of out-of-focus blur. However, I think the Oriston, the Domiron's more humble successor, is the most interesting lens to compare. It was introduced in 1964 and later produced under the Pentagon brand name. It has a 6:4 configuration to match the Domiron's, and it also has a short minimum focusing distance for the era. This short MFD helps it produce very attractive bokeh close-up, most notably lovely large bokeh bubbles. And here's how the Oriston compares to the Domiron wide open. While we look at these shots, it's worth pointing out that the mass-produced Oriston is a much, much cheaper lens to buy today. It has an M42 mount that's easy to adapt to digital cameras. I'd highly recommend the Oriston to anyone who wants to try a good, inexpensive vintage Fast 50 that produces a lovely retro look to images in the right light. There are some real differences to how the two lenses render contrasts, colors, and bokeh wide open. The color rendering is clearly different, with the Domiron producing more color contrasty images. One of the reasons for this is that brighter objects in the frame look more vivid from the Domiron. This is one of the more obvious examples, just straight out of camera. My guess from these photos is that the Oriston has stronger coatings, reducing the intensity of those brighter objects. The Oriston is the faster lens with a narrower depth of field at the same focal length as the Domiron, and it does produce slightly smoother out-of-focus blur, and the more dreamy contrasts of the Oriston also make the images appear smoother. Domiron backgrounds, where there is a busier background, tend to look busier. Sharpness wide open is an interesting one. Normally lenses with stronger coatings can appear to be sharper with less ghosting, but I give the edge to the Domiron on the basis of these comparisons. The Oriston can produce beautiful bokeh bubbles, some of the best I've seen from an old f1.8 lens, if you like smooth, reasonably subtle bubbles. Like the Domiron, the Oriston's bubbles are a little squeezed away from the center, compared to, say, a Pancolor 50 f1.8's more conventional oval shapes. However, the distortions are not as pronounced as the Domiron, and to my eyes, the Domiron's effects are more interesting. Stopped down at longer distances, the Oriston performs well, but I don't think it's in quite the same league as the Domiron. Overall, I think the Domiron is a more impressive performer, both wide open and stopped down, than the Oriston, although the Oriston remains an excellent value old lens. After these comparisons, I decided to do a few more with some other lenses with this indoor scene. With the Domiron, you can see those irregular shapes again when you stop down the lens one notch, while the shapes become more regular if you stop down one more time. Now, here's a lens that was made just before the Domiron, the Meyer Optik Görlitz Primotar 50 f2.8, and this is a crop because the Primotar can't focus nearly as close as the Domiron. The Primotar is a very competent lens, but it's let down for this kind of scene by its slow speed and its relatively long minimum focus distance. One of my best bokeh lenses is the Carl Zeiss Jena Pancolor 50 f1.8, the M42 mount radioactive version, with noticeable golden tones to the image. The Pancolor can render beautiful, sharp, wide-open results, but I think the Domiron produces better in-to-out-of-focus rendering in this comparison. Another great Pancolor is the Exactamount 50 f2. The interesting thing about these shots, to me anyway, is that the Domiron is rendering like a fast lens, with a narrower depth of field and more blurry out-of-focus areas. The next lens on my list is the Kuribayashi CC Petri Oracle 50 f2, a lens that has a strong reputation for the unique and distinctive quality of its bokeh. The lens does not have a particularly close focus, so this image is a crop. I do like this shot. The bubbles are significantly different from the Domiron, with those lines around the bubbles. The rendering is more like that produced by a triplet design lens, but with a more subtle style. If you'd like to see what a real triplet lens design can do, then here are the distinctive soap bubbles produced by a Trioplan 100 f2.8. This image is again straight out of camera. It packs quite a punch. Finally, a Takuma 50 f2, a brand that followers of my channel will not be surprised to see included amongst my best bokeh vintage lenses. The photo was taken on APS-C mode to get closer in than the lens allows on full frame. At current market prices, this M42 mount lens can be found online for around 5% of the price of the Domiron. That's right, 5% of the price. And I don't know what you think, but to me the Takuma has done a super job. Lovely big juicy bubbles, subtle out-of-focus blur, and good clean colors. In conclusion, having taken these and other comparative shots I've not shown here, do I think the Domiron deserves to be treated as bokeh royalty? There are two aspects to this. Firstly, is the Domiron one of the best bokeh fast 50s ever made? And secondly, is it so special that it deserves to be treated like royalty? You don't actually need to use the best, most expensive lens to produce great bokeh. The composition and lighting and skills and sometimes luck of the photographer are all very important as well. Having said that, different lenses clearly help to produce different styles, especially in the way out-of-focus highlights are rendered. And in this regard, I do like the Domiron style, those squished bubbles. They're very distinctive, especially compared to the more generic cat's-eye shapes of many other lenses. And the lens's unusually short minimum focusing distance is a distinct advantage. So yes, I do think the Domiron is one of the most unique and distinctive, if not the best, old fast 50s I've tried. And if it's not the best, that's because I like using different lenses to produce different styles, so I don't have a single best bokeh lens. This brings us on to the second point. Does the Domiron deserve to be treated as royalty? Is it really that special amongst all lenses, old and new? Well, the lens, like royalty, does have a very powerful family heritage. There are many fans of how the old Meyer optic Görlitz lenses perform and render out-of-focus areas wide open, including not just the fast 50s, but also lenses such as the Trioplan 100 f2.8. And the Domiron probably does deserve to be treated as a royalty. It is special, given its size, the dual stop-down controls, and those floating elements. The lens certainly delivers up to its promise. As I said earlier, it didn't disappoint, even with my sky-high expectations from reading about the lens beforehand. I was once, only once, in the same room as Queen Elizabeth II, and her aura was palpable. The Domiron, when you're with the lens, has an aura too. The Domiron also reflects the other side of royalty. It's a bit of an old-fashioned anachronism in the modern world. Like royalty, the lens is very expensive, possibly too expensive for what it delivers, and like some royals, some copies are seriously flawed with that splodge. Again, like royalty, the lens's status relies in part on very vocal PR campaigns from loyal owners and supporters, embellishing its myth and its worth in a way that does not perhaps match reality. Walter Bagehot, writing in 1867, made a distinction between the monarchy and an elected parliament as the difference between the dignified, represented by the monarchy, and the efficient, represented by parliament. The problem in today's world is it's very hard to be 100% dignified when the mass media and the internet spotlight the less dignified aspects of specific royals. And in a roundabout way, that's how I'd sum up the Domiron. It's a very dignified lens, and while it's not 100% perfect if you start to look closer, overall it's still impressive. It's not the most efficient lens, and it's expensive. So as long as you're happy with that distinction, it's a winner. I'll be most interested to read comments you have about this lens and my video. And until the next time, all the best.